I do think there's this opportunity, though, to take this idea of extreme stewardship into the workplace. And I'll tell you what I mean about that and then talk through how I see that happening in the workplace. For me, it's using every resource we get wisely so that we can provide the best outcomes for the customer, the shareholder, the taxpayer. It's really that simple. But I use the word extreme on purpose because it's easy for the inertia of the status quo, of our systems, of how we're organized, the current knowledge we have, just to pull us into a direction of mediocrity. And it takes, I think, a lot of focus and deliberateness to ratchet up a level and say, I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to compromise anything that isn't my very best. And that isn't easy. And there's some different ways I've learned to approach how we think about the problems in the workplace. Because here's the reality, there's problems everywhere. And I don't think our job should be how many problems can we eliminate. Actually, I disagree with that, and I'll tell you why later. But it's more about where do we know how to focus? There's so many things we could do. There's so many issues for the customers we're trying to serve, so many issues for our shareholders, our workplace, our colleagues. Where do we focus? So that's what I hope I can deliver today. And I've had a, I think, unique journey. Being blind at one point in my life, I was on welfare as I was trying to make this transition in my life and experience the other side of being on big bureaucracies. And there's sometimes a real disconnect between what's happening at the top level and what's happening on the front line. So let me go through the presentation today. There's a definition I use for theory of constraints, and this isn't all about the theory of constraints, but it's the body of knowledge I use. What? Oh, yeah, this other slide I forgot. I love this slide. The real voyage of discovery does not consist in seeking new lands, but seeing with new eyes. I think that's really true. It's how we think about the problems we face and how we solve. Because think about this, everything in our organizations, it's made up. Somebody had an idea, so they wrote a policy or a law, or they had an idea and created a product or service, and then they develop a supply chain and a manufacturing plan and distribution channel and marketing. All of it originates from our thoughts. What did we think about something? So how we think is incredibly important, and how do we reframe how we see things? That's what I think is just so critical in the work, at least I do. So there's a definition here I have for theory of constraints, and it mostly just structures the presentation today. And it's about helping organizations identify exceptional value, the best way to deliver that value, and in a way that provides exceptional return for the business, the shareholder, the taxpayer. And that's, for me, a triple win, that we serve the customer, we serve the taxpayer, the shareholder, the organization, and there are employees, if we do it right in the delivery model, are also better off. And so that's a high standard by itself, that we're not going to compromise on any of those. But I'll walk through the presentation today in that order. So let's first talk about this idea of exceptional value. It's a term that's thrown around a lot. I have a very specific definition I use. This is a definition from Dr. Ellie Goldratt. Some of you know who he is and his body of work, but I love this definition. So value is created when we remove a significant limitation in a way that was not possible before and in a way our competition can't replicate. We could spend an hour just on that definition, but it's very different. It's about removing a limitation, and a significant one, right? Not just adding new features or benefits, or not just being so excited about what we do in our product and our service and we're trying to sell other people and convince other people. It's that we're understanding from our customer's perspective, what is the significant limitation that's blocking them? And a couple ways to think about this. Imagine going up an escalator's going down and you're trying to go up it. There's so much energy to overcome the inertia of the escalator going down. That by itself can be a huge limitation for people. And I'll give you some examples. Or somebody rolling up, the great analogy of Sisyphus trying to push the rock up the mountain and it keeps coming down. Very often our customers in the business world or in government have a very significant limitation. And we assume in the world of theory of constraints, the people are good. Now that doesn't mean there aren't Ted Bundys out there, there are. But it's a working philosophy, because when we assume people are good and they're not making good decisions for their lives, or they're not doing what we expected them to do, we have to assume that we need to find a way to help them remove that limitation. So let me give you an example of this. I'll give you a few, both in the private sector and public sector. So private sector, Omron, if you've heard of them, they were the first out to make a blood pressure device that you could use at home. And they, in that field, they were pretty amazing. And what was the limitation they were removing for the customer? And why was this so, quote unquote, we use that term innovative. We throw it around a lot. Innovation is just this definition of value for me. They found a big need customers had that wasn't being met, and that was the hassle and inconvenience of having to go to a doctor's office to get your blood pressure taken. Now they were able to create a device that was accurate and you could take it home. Removed a huge amount of hassle and friction, these friction points people have to get their blood pressure taken. Okay, well, that's a pretty straightforward one. Let me give you a couple others, though, that may not be so obvious. Let's say I'm somebody who's just coming out of the prison system, and we want them to successfully re-enter society. And we can say a lot of things we think they should do. They should get a job. They should stop doing drugs. They should, be responsible parents. All these things they should do. No doubt about it. Those would be good things for them. The question is, why aren't they? We take somebody, we don't give them, the supports they need, and we stick them back to their old environment with all the triggers, with all the old habits surrounding them, and expecting them to overcome the inertia of their old lifestyle, to go up that escalator as it's coming down. And we wonder, why don't they just do it? The inertia of their old life is pretty powerful. And so the question is, how do I remove that limitation? How do I bring in a solution that isn't just about, hey, here's good job coaching, but creates enough momentum to disrupt those old habits? I'll talk about that at the end and how we deliver the solution. So we're always looking for, what's this limitation? When I was going blind, a lot of folks thought that the limitation of blindness would be that you can't see. And I can understand why people would think that. It would be convenient to see, for sure. But there are some amazing blind individuals who redefined the limitation. And they defined it as not the inability to see, but our mindset. The eyes are just one way of getting information. There are many other ways to get information. Our mindset and how we think about blindness is actually the biggest obstacle. When you understand that, you can learn Braille and cane travel and all these other things so you can access the world differently. It's a mindset issue. And when we can't distinguish or identify the limitation from our customer's perspective, from the very get-go, we're going down the wrong road. We know probably many of you know the example Steve Covey uses. You have a ladder, you can go really fast up the ladder, but it's on the wrong wall. This first step of exceptional value is about putting ourselves in our customer's shoes and thinking deeply about it. And we're not going to necessarily find this in a whole data dump and some huge strategic planning initiative. It starts, and we have an actual process we use to help expose these limitations. But it's just the foundation of building everything else out in a way that can deliver this extreme stewardship. So let's go a little bit more into this, though. Why do organizations go awry in this? In this case, with the Omron example with the blood pressure machine, their first thing is they went out, made their blood pressure machine, and then they kept trying to just enhance their blood pressure device. And they lost their way, they kind of stagnated. And why is that? Well, very often, if we don't get the goal right, everything else goes wrong. And why is that important? The problem is only the problem within the context of the goal. If I'm a company and my goal is to be profitable, which I'll talk here that we have to have, that's a necessary condition, but if that's my main goal, I start managing my cost, I start managing my stock, and I don't start with the value. If Omron at the beginning had said, our goal is to provide convenient, hassle-free, vital testing at home for our clients, it wouldn't have just been a one and done. And so they stagnated. We want to start with, what do we give, not do what we get. We'll get to how do we get that. We'll get how we become profitable and have good execution. But we start with, what do we give? And many of the goals I see in organizations, in the public sector as well, are very inward focused. In the public sector, am I compliant? Think of economic development initiatives. How much more money do we get as a state? How much revenue do we generate? It's not about, how do I remove the limitation from an industry so it can in fact thrive and serve its customers and its customers' limitations. So a lot to say about anchoring in the goal that's anchored in the limitation we're removing for the customer. And I think this is the bedrock of all stewardship. What are we giving to serve, to help, to lift? There's some other traps we can fall into when setting goals. This one being very inward focused, which we've talked about. It's all about what do I get, not what am I giving. We can have goals that are very vague and aspirational. I see this, for example, let's take higher education. We can have goals, and I see this in many, many states, so it's not unique, to be affordable. Well, what do we mean by affordable? Is it that tuition doesn't grow more than the CPI? Is it that a certain percent of somebody's gross income is no more than that is allocated for student debt? What do we really mean? And we do that to hold ourselves accountable. It's really easy to have these motivational goals, one agency and all for one, all this stuff. What does it mean? Like, as leaders, I think part of the job, and leaders of yourself, of your team, whoever you're leading, is to put ourselves on the hook, to show that we're going to be accountable for this, and not in a punitive way, but to show, did our efforts work or not, so we can evaluate and course correct when needed. We see also goals that really confuse the means with the end. This one's very common. I'll see organizations with the goal to go digital, to digitize. Well, that's great, but that's a strategy, it's a tactic. If I digitize, what do I expect to get out of that? You may find that if your actual goal is to reduce the touch time or how many times papers touch or errors in the paperwork itself, you maybe find that you can first consolidate the amount of paper you have and actually standardize your work product so you reduce errors in the paperwork itself, and then you can digitize. But without getting clear on the outcome, we can get really confused on that as well. And then finally, goals that we don't have a direct impact over. Again, economic development, government, we don't create jobs. I say we, because I'm not there now, but we didn't. Government doesn't create jobs, the private sector does. So rather than talking about job creation in government, it really could be a different type of focus about how do we help an industry thrive? An agricultural industry maybe that's stagnant, how do we help it move into a non-commodity market to a high premium market? In that case, the wages in that industry go up for those employees. It's a very different mindset. This is the beginning, I think, for service and extreme stewardship. So this is the first concept, and let's just summarize some of these takeaways that are really important for exceptional value. It's always anchored in the customer. What does the customer need? What's the customer's limitation, and how are we going to remove that? I want to give you one more example here, because this one came up recently. I was on a panel and they were talking about the healthcare system incentivizing people to eat healthy, right? We always love incentives, and that puts such the burden on the person, because we assume, well, the person would just do it if they're more motivated, or we give them some incentive to do it. But what if you're in Baltimore City, in an inner city, and you don't have a car and you have to take 2 to 3 buses to even get to a grocery store where there's fresh produce because you live in a food desert, and you're a single mom with 2 kids and you don't have a lot of resources. The idea that an incentive is going to remove the friction point, the hassle, the massive inconvenience to make that happen is crazy. If we don't understand the limitation, we can add all these incentives and actually waste money, time, energy, makes us feel good, but we haven't solved the person's problem. So we want to make sure we're always anchored in giving what we want to focus on, what we give, not just what we get. Did I miss anything else? Oh yeah, I always forget this one. I have this deal with myself because I can't see the slides, I memorize them. And if I get them right, I get a candy bar, but I just missed one, so I don't get a candy bar now.
We're also 20 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to just touch on these seductive 7. We won't spend a lot of time. What I find is if people don't understand the problem to solve, right? What's the problem? Strategy is just the direction of a solution. If you have a solution, you better know your problem. If you don't have clarity on the problem you're solving, the limitation you're removing, it is easy to go in multiple directions that have no impact. And I call these the seductive 7. These are where I see private sector, public sector go to when they don't have clarity and they think they give themselves the illusion of progress. If I just get a bigger budget, my problem will be solved. If I just get a new piece of technology, my problem will go away. If I get more data integration, I'll solve all my issues. If I have just one more strategic plan, even though I failed to deliver on the last one, if I reorganize all of my agencies into one, somehow the front lines work will be better. These are things that give us the illusion. It's not that they're bad, they're tactics that could be part of our solution, tactically, but they that by themselves are never the solution. They distract a lot of our time and attention, resources, and we really never solve the problem. So I'll just go to the takeaways. Here's the takeaways. Most problems aren't worth solving. We need to focus of all the things we could do, which we can't do everything. Our time and attention is the biggest constraint. If we can't do everything, where do we focus? Most problems we can just ignore because they're not the core limitation. They're symptoms of what's going on. And that the real breakthrough happens when we reframe the question, not by jumping to a new solution. When we ask new and different questions, what's the customer limitation? What's preventing this? Why have our strategies in the past failed? Those are the questions we need to think about that will give us the breakthrough so we can actually build a strategy and execution plan. Okay, let's go to the next one. Exceptional value we've talked about. Now we have to think about exceptional return. How do we create something where our taxpayers and our shareholders and our company, it's profitable so we can pay our employees and not waste taxpayer dollars, et cetera? How do we create exceptional return? I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but there's just a couple points I want to make. We call this a business model. In government, I call it a financial viability. But let me give you an example. This is something many of you have probably heard about. It's called Life Alert. So if you have somebody who is maybe usually for older people or parents, they can hold this. If something happens to them, they can automatically push a button and they're connected to help. And it removed a big limitation, right? If I can't be with my parents 24/7 and they need help, or if they fall and they can't get to help, they actually can access it. It was pretty transformative new product that got a lot of traction. So it removed the limitation, but what was interesting about Life Alert is what we call the reference for price and the reference for value. And this is the beginning of setting up a good business model. If I were them, we would talk about it in terms like this. For $1 a day, which is my price, you get something that's like 24/7 access to a nurse. $1 a day, continual constant oversight by a nurse, right? So we're talking about here's your cost, what's the value you get for that? Or we'll talk about here's your value, it's really big, but it costs less. And when I understand my reference for price, reference for value, one, it helps my customers understand what I'm trying to do, which is the beginning of developing my sales, et cetera. But I'm also having to think about how do I set up a structure that delivers that, both my costs and my supply chain and all those things. So here's some elements we go into a little bit deeper once we understand our reference for price, reference for value. And I'll have to say in government, most of the time people don't even know what it costs them to deliver a quality product, right? It can be we love complexity sometimes in our systems, and we have really complex budgets with lots of items and lots of accounting standards, and all those are great, but they don't always answer these key questions about what does it cost me to deliver a really high quality product. And that's just such an essential basic question we've got to be able to answer, because all that other complexity, while maybe necessary, it isn't sufficient to provide the kind of value we want. So what does it cost us to deliver a high quality product? Then we want to look at other things. What's my purchasing situation? What's the easiest place for a customer on the public side or private to access my service so they don't create lots of friction points? I was coming out of an airplane in an airport, before COVID, and there was a chiropractor. I was traveling with a colleague, a chiropractor right when you got off the airplane, right in the airport. You get off the airplane, your body hurts. That chiropractor took out all the friction. Made it natural and easy to make a decision to get that adjustment versus, having them to market and go find me and convince me to come to them. So we're interested in the purchasing situation. We're interested in third-party collaboration. If I've got a non-for-profit working with the population I serve, I don't need to set up a separate program. I can leverage their expertise and build on that. That helps bring my costs down, right? Going back to that cost per, or the value price reference. So we look at distribution, competition. I'm not going to go into all of these, but to say at the end of the day, extreme stewardship requires that we think through the financial feasibility and the business model so that we can hit that reference for price, reference for value, giving the best quality service at the least cost possible so that we can give a return to those who are funding our programs and compensate our employees. I've been in over 200 plus systems now, maybe 220 plus now, and I haven't found one yet that didn't have capacity to improve, either in their business model or their value proposition or in operations. And this extreme stewardship has to presuppose that we can give more, that we're not as good as we can get. There's more we could do, because we have to have that tenacity to go find these missing elements and not just say, this is how it is. You know, it's good as it can get. In fact, I'll say this before we get to the next phase of this. What's challenging in this work is that the opportunities are usually invisible to us, right? We react to the things we can touch, see, experience, you know, spreadsheets, sales data, reports that are developed for us, the actual, you know, see people on the work floor. But if we don't see it, we don't know that it's actually there. You know, we find what we search for, and we search what we believe is there. And if we don't have this mindset that we're going to find a way to get better, we won't have the tenacity to go ask the right questions and find these tools or apply the tools and keep finding better ways to deliver to the people we serve. Okay, so some takeaways here, pretty basic. It's we should be able to set up programs, private sector or public, that can be scaled. I see all these times we do these little pilots, and up front, nobody's thought about, well, geez, that would cost us like $10 trillion to scale it. So it's not a well thought out pilot in the beginning. It's got to be scalable and provide exceptional return. And companies that I see on the private sector who think long term about this continuous value proposition, over time, you'll see their stocks, you'll see them grow and grow, where others are kind of focused on quarterly returns and really are more interested in managing the stock than the company and the value. Okay, last one, and I think this stuff is really interesting. I'm pretty wonky like this, but we've talked about exceptional value. We've talked about exceptional return. And this last piece is exceptional delivery. And I think all great ideas fail in execution, right? To this date, we've had, you know, ideas on paper. We're thinking through things. But now you got to like make this thing real. It's like having your blueprint for your house, which you have to have, but now you got to go build it. And that's tricky sometimes, because building it, there's a lot of these, what we call flow issues, that we may not all know about, and they're not always visible to us, or technology can hide them. So I'm going to give you 3 elements of this that I think are pretty insightful and make you to think differently. This first slide shows a very, very simple workflow. And I recognize it's overly simplified, but the principle is true wherever you go. This is a workflow, and there's 5 people involved, A, B, C, D, and E. Each one has a different kind of job they do that contributes to the final product, and it takes them different times. So A can do 20 units in an hour, and B can do 16, C can do 10, D can do 14, and E can do 18. So the beginning of an hour, I come and I drop 100 units of work in front of A. The question is, what can this system produce at the end of the hour? Any thoughts? Can they? I don't know, you guys are probably all muted, huh? So I'll just give you the answer. You know, what we tend to do in our organizations is we fix the things that we can see, and we focus on improving each individual part. What we're interested in is improving how the parts work together. So this system can only produce 10 units, right? A does 20, it hands off its 20 units to B. B can do 16, so there's 4 units just sitting there in inventory. B hands its work off to C. C does 10, so there's now another additional 6 units just hanging out, waiting to be worked. And then D and E, they could do more, but they only have 10 units to work on. This isn't just about inventory in terms of product and inventory that way. It could be people needing desperately to get services. It could be a business needing a permit so they can actually thrive and do what they're supposed to do. This thing of stuff getting stuck in the system happens in every type of system you can imagine. And the judicial system. I mean, this is people waiting to know if they're free or guilty, innocent or guilty. So this is a huge deal, and every system has a constraint. There's different types of constraints. Some of those are an expertise constraint, right? Doctors provide the value, why we go to the healthcare system, right? We go to get treated and diagnosed. And how much time a doctor has will absolutely impact what the entire system can handle in a doctor's office. Hospitals, it's a little different. So We're always looking for the constraint. And this is a wonderful thing because instead of trying to improve everything, we don't need to. We need to get the system to align to and what we call subordinate to the constraint. If C can do 10, my focus for improving should be at C. If I can get C to do 15, my whole system's better off. And I have additional capacity at A and B that I could move to C. And instead of trying to balance every piece, I just have to get the whole system to produce and do what C needs it to do. It becomes a very important focusing mechanism to know where do we spend our time and attention. And we also don't need to waste time improving things that won't have an impact to the system. This is huge. It's a really critical insight, and it takes practice. And I'm not expecting you guys all to go out and say, hey, I know how to do constraints management. But it is to say, know that focus matters. It matters a great deal. Okay, so second, I'll just go for a few more things and I'll be done. The second one I really want you to understand is this idea of synchronization. A lot of times we'll use this word coordinate and collaborate, and they feel good, but you got to have something to synchronize against. Imagine if you're driving down the road and an ambulance goes by, it sends a signal and hundreds of cars stop, right? It synchronizes everybody's driving behaviors like that fast. So in this case, I'll just walk through this quickly. Imagine you're in a hospital and my dogs won't stop barking. Can you go shut the door? Sure. We got 2 dogs because our kids wanted to. And now we're like, what did we do? So imagine you're in a hospital and you have a doctor who's blue, you've got a lab that's red, and a social worker who's doing discharge planning. And they come to work and they each have their own priorities for the day. But to discharge a patient from a hospital bed, which is a big deal for hospitals, the length of stay, I need all of these folks to focus on A. Patient A doesn't get discharged until the lab, the social worker, and the doctor has each done their work related to that patient, and they're good. But in this system, because they each have their own priorities, we call it local optimization. They're each doing what's best for them locally. The first cycle goes through, they each do one piece of work, and nobody's getting discharged. Second round of work goes through, no one's getting discharged. Not till the third round are people discharged. This means extended lengths of stay. Patients are frustrated. They can actually get worse in a hospital if they're there longer than they need to be, sometimes with, contagions and things like that. It's expensive for insurance, and it's creating potentially an inventory of emergency room people wanting to come into the system. This is a big insight around delivery. How do we synchronize? You can go to the next slide. What we want is the system to send a signal to everybody what their priority should be, not the other way around. So if the system says patient A today is the priority, so lab, make A your first priority, social worker, you make it A, and doctor, you make it A, they all get A done and A can move out. Now we know this is simplified. This is even way worse when we desynchronize in real environments, because a social worker may take way longer than a doctor. And so the doctor's churning out patients and the social workers can only do a handful compared to the doctor, and things just get worse and worse and more desynchronized. Whenever we have multiple people touching a product, contracts, IT systems, social service environments where many people need to help this person, a hospital, synchronization is huge. We tried this out in our state hospital, not tried it out, we applied it. Our state mental health hospital down near BYU had a 6-month waiting list. People who were in jail who were not competent to stand trial, needing to get in to get treated so they can get justice. 6-month waiting list. There was a lawsuit. We did this implementation around synchronization and eliminated the wait list, created 22% reduction in length of stay and a 77% increase in capacity. No new money, just through synchronizing. Now they may need more money over time, but we first want to make sure our execution on our commitment is great. We can have a commitment and a value proposition on mental health, but if we can't deliver it, we have failed. And these things that are impacting our execution are often invisible, and we chase any problem that comes at us, and we want to stop that. We want to understand what's the problem to solve at every level of constraint, and here it's in operations. Final one I want to talk about. You'll see there's a few rules of flow, but I'm giving you just 3 of about 10 I use. But this one right here is, it's a small stream going down a mountain, right? Moving through. Doesn't have a lot of power though, does it? It may be moving, but it's not a lot of volume or impact. Let's look at the next picture. This is a big river, lots of volume, but moving very slowly. This third river has the magic sauce, right? It's fast moving with lots of volume. And what does that create? That is what is the necessary ingredient for hydroelectricity. In order for there to be enough power to generate electricity, we need speed and volume. We call this dosage. It's the intensity of your intervention. How quickly and how much of it do you give? This is a critical concept in a phenomenon we call bad multitasking in our organizations. We're not going to do this exercise here. I'm going to have it here if any of you guys want to download it or use it. We'll have instructions on it. But what we do, and every single time this happens, we have teams take these 3 projects, write 1 through 12, write multitasking, and then write square, circle, triangle 4 times. But instead of doing 1 project at a time, we make them do one, like write 1, write M, write square, and then go back. We make them switch between projects. Inevitably, when we force people to spread their time and energy across multiple projects, everything takes way longer and the quality suffers. We let them go back and just do 1 project at a time, and everything gets done much, much quicker. I just did this with the team this morning, and the reliability is tighter, the speed's faster, the quality's better when they can just focus and finish. And this is an issue of dosage. If I have a big initiative in my organization and I'm not highly focused on it, and I don't have the resources of my team focused on this so I can get decisions made quickly, everything in my organization will take longer, right? So we talk about focus and finish. This is from a leadership launching initiatives to the front line working somebody coming from the prison. Imagine coming out of the prison system and you meet with your case manager or your adult probation and parole agent, and it's not their fault because the system's designed to make these guys bad, the case managers bad multitask. Let's say you're coming out of the prison and you meet with your case manager once a month for an hour or twice a month for an hour each. You really think 2 hours is sufficient dosage to change the inertia of somebody's conditions? A stranger shows up and meets with you every other week for an hour, and we think that's sufficient to change these habits and lifestyles and the challenges they face. I mean, it's crazy business. And we yet don't design our systems around dosage. If I'm going to launch a new initiative at the higher level, I want my top resources focused. And I'd rather some of my resources not work on other things, but be available when I need them for the critical priority to be decided upon. So I'm not waiting forever. This is, again, kind of a synchronization issue. Bad multitasking has massive implications. An interesting study from Harvard. At the individual task level, you're usually losing about 25% capacity. We've seen this in our own technology agency when we implemented single task flow, focus on 1 piece of code and finish before you bring in another. Just giving them time to focus and finish increased their throughput by 25%. But at the organizational level, we sometimes get rewarded about how many things we can start, right? We're busy. How are you doing? I'm busy. We got a lot of stuff going on. I don't care how busy people are. I care about getting things over the finish line. And at the organizational level, you can lose 55 to 70% capacity, jumping in between things. Now, you never just get to do one thing. There is a balance here because, I don't live in La La Land. But one of the biggest things we do in organizations is reduce what we call their work in process, from the strategic level to the front line to somebody's own individual productivity, and making sure managers give people time to focus and not have meetings and emails. Even simple things like that can make a difference, especially in knowledge work where it takes a lot of deep thinking. So I'm going to kind of wrap up here and just kind of a final quote. I love this by Steve Jobs. It's about, innovation isn't seeing how many ideas you can have. It's really about knowing the fewest amount of ideas you need to focus on. And if I were to sum up theory of constraints in the work I do in a few keywords, it's about focus, and it's about clarity, and it's about exceptional return and value for those we serve. Takeaways from here, just because we can improve something doesn't mean we should. We should focus at the constraint, and that's really huge. Dosage matters. And we can manage complex systems. I mean, complex to me means most people it just means they don't understand it. when you understand the constraint and the flow, you can actually make seemingly complex systems much simpler to manage just by knowing how to manage the constraint. But that's a whole other discussion. So at the end of the day, all of us want to make a difference. I don't think people show up to work and say, I don't want to make a difference. That's not the question. The intention is not the question, right? And it's not just finding the next new tool, right? There's lots of tools out there. I think the real constraint for ourselves is learning how to think and doing so in a way that we will not compromise and not give just everything we can to getting the customers what they deserve and they need, private sector or public sector. And I think I feel so sensitive again to this because of my earlier story of being on that other end. And I'm sure many of you have felt like that when you go to government or a private sector and it just isn't working for you, right? And we sometimes have to just force the discussion in our own minds to say, this doesn't have to be the way it is. We can question the assumptions and the beliefs. Our systems are perfectly designed to get the results we're getting. If we want a different result, we have to question how the system's functioning. And with that, I am open. I know that was a lot, but I want to at least get you guys exposed to some of these really, I think, profound concepts.
Thank you, Kristen. And we do have some questions that have already come in. And just a reminder, if anybody wants to ask additional questions, please just submit them in the chat box and we'll get to as many as possible. So the first question that came in was, what's been your favorite job or role that you've had?
Well, I want to be a forest ranger, but no one will hire me as a blind person. I was actually studying zoology in college. I wanted to be like Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall and go over to Africa and study the gorillas. But, you know, I can tell you, every job has had its pros and cons. Like the job I just left with the governor for 8 years was just an amazing opportunity. I grew a lot, but it was very stressful. So I think there's pros and cons of every job. So I don't know how to, love being a mom. So that's like a given. I don't mean to weasel out of this, but even though my job, I had my first job back when I was in DC, not first job, but when the Bush administration, I didn't love that job. The federal bureaucracy was not fun for me, but I learned a heck of a lot. So didn't like it for fun, but loved it from what I learned. So I always believe in silver linings. It's just a philosophy of mine.
Find a way to enjoy every role.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next one, what do you see as the biggest challenge in implementing the theories that you've discussed, either for private entities or governmental entities? And besides, there's only one of you. Well,
one, that's the one thing I'm trying to set up at the university is to scale this. But I think it's really, and I don't mean to be trite about this, but the tools are easy. We can jump to like people can value stream and do 1 million Kaizens and fix 1,000 things, and everyone can get certified in Six Sigma, and we have to think. I don't need to do a data dump integration, massive data lake to really think about what's the limitation for the prisoner. Now, I can hypothesize and I can use valid data to validate or refute, but it is thinking and it is questioning every dang assumption that blocks us from getting the result. And if I could, I got to share you this story because I think it's a mindset issue. One of my mentors, when I was getting that training, told me this story, Dr. Fred Schroeder, and I love this story. He was, at the time, years and years ago, he's like a professor now, but he was teaching kids who were blind in schools. He's blind. He had such high expectations for me and others he taught. And he was teaching a little boy who was Tony, and Tony was 7. And Tony was blind and wanted to play tag with his friends and came to Dr. Schroeder and said, how do I play tag? Thinking, of course I can play tag. I'm a kid. Why wouldn't I play tag? And Dr. Schroeder didn't have the answer. Like, he didn't know how to play tag as a blind person. He went home and thought about it. And again, he has super high expectations, but he came back and he was super kind of sad because he didn't know how to tell this kid, look, I don't know how you're going to play tag. This may be an area where you have to sit out. But luckily, right, out of the mouths of babes, because kids have not got all these messed up ideas about what is and what isn't possible like we adults have. Tony came up and was so excited and said, I know how to play tag. He'd taken jars and put pebbles in the jars and gave his friends these jars. So they had agreed to stay in a certain area, and then he could hear his friends as they ran with the jars. We tried this with our kids and it worked. So, and this guy, Dr. Schroeder, is brilliant, and he is an expert in the field of blindness. And it was this assumption. We cannot, there's this greatest quote by Einstein, we can't solve problems at the same level of understanding we had when they were created. So we're going to hit our knowledge base. That's why we set ambitious targets. Why did we go into Utah and say 25% improvement? Because I wanted to force us to get outside of the boundaries of what we already know. It's what we don't know where the opportunity is, and that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to say, I don't know. I have to question this assumption. I'm going to have to learn something new. It's this almost emotional more than anything. The intellectual stuff will come. But do we dare to have the courage to go after something we're not sure how to do yet? I think ultimately that's the constraint.
A lot of food for thought there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A couple more questions I think we'll have time for here.
Sure.
When trying to increase, this is from Tanner, when trying to increase value, what do you focus on first? Increasing output, either goods or services provided, or decreasing input, materials or labor used?
Good question. For me, value, I always start, and I'm going to maybe reframe it a little differently. I always start with quality. I'm interested in the causes of cost, right? So very often we try to go after cost directly through inputs or input reduction and output. So I'll get to your thing. I always focus on quality first, and that goes back to the customer need. If I have that right, the operational model becomes much easier to design. And I focus on something called throughput. It's what is the completed work product. And I know that sounds like, well, yeah, how's that different from an output? It could be semantics. Let me give you an example. Medical examiner's office project we did with them, you would think that their output, which they thought was how many autopsies did we do? But what we're interested in is what's the completed work? And the completed work is an actual report that signals if this person died of natural causes, homicide, etc. When you understand your throughput, you can design your system to go quick. I will limit work up front based off of the capacity of my constraint to manage throughput. If I have a medical examiner that can only handle 40 cases at a time, which is way too high, but let's say 40 cases, I would limit my throughput to that because I want to focus and finish. My goal is completed work. And if I make my constraint bad multitask, everything will take longer. So we actually control the amount of work coming into the system based off the throughput, but that doesn't mean we slow the work. When we do that, we actually find that the constraint in the system can get much more done over a period of time. Yes, maybe at any one point they're doing one autopsy, but in a month they can double the amount of reports they get done because I've let them focus and finish. So I control at the beginning for sure, but I do it in a way that actually increases my throughput over time. And that's the assumption. We never have to compromise. We can get better quality, faster and cheaper. And that's the standard for me.
Great answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This next one, I'll try to read it in a way. It's a little long, but this is from Christian. He says, stewardship is a mindset, like you say. My stewardship mindset was developed by consistent choices over time. I'm a department mentor and I want to instill this type of mindset to our new hires, but I'm finding such a mindset to be sadly rare. How would you recommend we go about inspiring and instilling this mindset to those around us?
Kristen, that's a great question. I'd love to hear what you think about that because I don't know if I have the answer. I definitely hire for that. I think it's much easier to teach tools and techniques than it is to teach mindset. So, I look for that in my hires, from economists to, people on operations, et cetera. So I hire for mindset. Skills matter, but those can come. I also believe in demonstrating, not convincing, even though here I'm trying to convince you guys. I feel like maybe I'm being a little fluffy here, but I feel like the journey of systems improvement, and Christian, you actually said it so well, is the journey of self-improvement. And I can't ask others to do something I'm not willing to do. And so this comes back to extreme stewardship, which is, do I live into my beliefs and my values in a way that people know what I'm about. And I don't have any other, Christian, I'd love to know. I try to hire for it and I try to live for it. And those are the only two things I know what to do. Those are the only things I know what to do. It's not easy. It's not easy. I would say this. Okay, one more thing, Christian, you're getting me to think. Let's walk our own talk on this. If we are trying to find the limitation for our customers, we have to think about what's the limitation for our employees. And if we assume our employees are good and want to do a good job, and I've had to fire people, I'm not saying everyone is, but if we assume that, I've seen managers, one group I was working with, and they were blaming everything on their employees. 30% of their employees were poor performers. And we looked at how the managers had structured their work, what we call full kitting, focus and finish. Did the manager make sure all the questions were answered before they started the work? Was the supervisor available when the person needed it? So my first thing as manager, again, extreme stewardship, is what's my role and contribution to the health of a team and how effective they can be? What are their limitations? Am I removing them? So I would say that's the third element. And when I've done all that and they're still not performing and I still can't inspire them, then I don't know what else to do. Go get a Coca-Cola and call it a day and say you did your best.
Reward yourself with a candy bar, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So one of the questions was, what are 5 books you'd recommend? Given the time, how about name 1 book you'd recommend? And then to finish it off, the last question is, where can we go for more insights and resources, whether from you or otherwise on this topic?
If you want to know just some real basics about TOC, there's some philosophies we have about how do you manage uncertainty, compromises, conflicts, which is the basic philosophy. There's a book called TOC Thinking. It's a little wonky, but I think it gives a pretty good grounding on, why we believe in certain things that kind of drives a lot of how we think. If you want a basic of how this works in a production system, you can read The Goal by Dr. Goldratt. It does a good job. I have 2 books, not promoting because we've given all the proceeds so far to the National Federation of the Blind, who was my change agent in my life. Stop Decorating the Fish. It gives, and The World of Fish Decorating. The World of Fish Decorating is more wonky. It gives a lot of tips and some. But I read all the time. I'm right now reading that book by Malcolm Gladwell on touch. I read probably 5 or 6 books at any time. I'm always reading. It's hard to choose a favorite. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm really active on LinkedIn. I post a lot there just to provide value and insight. So that's a really good tool. We have a free thing we just help people with because I get a lot of questions and I can't help everyone. It's called the Fulcrum. And we lecture once a month, and I have somebody else who's implemented talk about how they did it. You can join the lectures live or go back and watch all the videos, and it just goes, the traps of the goals, how do you do systems thinking? There's just tons of information there that it's just there to help serve people, and give some, just give some ideas and insights. So that's also a place where you can just for free go grab whatever you need. And and then starting the certificate program. I hate to say it, but the University of Utah Business School, they approached me, and that will be a pretty intense 5 days, all day, every day certificate on TSC. So it's cool stuff.
And that certificate program,
it'll be ready.
Ready in fall. Okay.
Yeah, I just finished the first draft of the curriculum. So it's going to be gird your loins. I tell people it's 5 days. It's going to be, there's a lot of stuff in there. How do you manage variation? What does complexity mean? How do you deal with skew distributions? We'll get into some wonky stuff in that. But anyway, mostly, this is a great group. I was super grateful for my time at BYU. It was a time in my life I was going blind. It was the best of times, worst of times. It was a hard time, but such a time too of growth. And I'm really honored that I could be back here today with this great team.